There are moments in life when everything feels heavy, when the people you counted on disappear, the future feels uncertain, and the world grows quiet. You look around and realize you're standing alone. No one to guide you, no one to rescue you, no one to lean on. But what if this moment of isolation is not your downfall, but the beginning of your rise? Allah often removes your support so you can discover your strength. When you have no one to rely on but Him, something powerful awakens inside you. And it is in this exact season, the season of loneliness, that Allah prepares you for elevation. When you lose people, you find your power. When people leave your life, it feels like the ground beneath you has collapsed. You question your worth, your decisions, and your future. But what appears to be loss is often the moment Allah is uncovering your inner strength. The believer is not weakened by isolation, they are awakened by it. Losing people forces the heart to stop leaning outward and start standing inward. You discover abilities you never used before, patience you never knew you possessed, and resilience that only hardship can reveal. This is not punishment, this is preparation. Many people never realize their power because they are always supported by others. But when the support disappears, the believer learns how to walk on their own, guided by Allah rather than by people. When people leave, your relationship with Allah deepens. You speak to Him more honestly, you depend on Him more sincerely, and in that reliance, your heart becomes steadier than it ever was in the presence of crowds. This season teaches you that your value was never in how many people stayed, but in how firmly you stand when they leave. The believer does not collapse when abandoned, they rise with renewed faith. Loss strips away illusions, it removes false comfort, it forces you to confront who you truly are, and in that confrontation, Allah introduces you to the strongest version of yourself. When people leave, your priorities change. You stop chasing approval, you stop explaining yourself, you begin choosing peace over presence, clarity over comfort. The believer who loses people and remains anchored in Allah gains wisdom that no book can teach. They see the world differently, they trust differently, they live differently. This is how Allah builds leaders through solitude, not applause. When you are left alone, your mind becomes clearer, your heart becomes quieter, and your soul becomes more alert. You begin hearing the guidance of Allah without interference. The power you discover is not loud, it is calm, it is steady, it is rooted in certainty. Losing people teaches you self-respect. You no longer beg for connection, you choose alignment. This is the moment when the believer stops surviving and starts becoming. Every loss becomes a lesson, every farewell becomes a doorway to strength. You begin to realize that the absence of others created space for Allah to fill. Your prayers deepen, your intentions sharpen, your discipline grows. The believer who rises after loss becomes unshakable. They are no longer controlled by fear of abandonment. They trust Allah's plan more than human promises. They walk with purpose instead of permission. And in that walk, Allah opens doors that were never accessible before. This is the power you find when you lose people, the power to rise. Allah removes support to teach self-reliance and tawakkul. When Allah removes the people and supports you once depended on, it is never random and never cruel. It is one of His most profound lessons in growth. The heart, when constantly leaning on others, never learns how to stand. So Allah, in His mercy, gently and sometimes painfully removes those crutches. Not because He wants you to fall, but because He wants you to rise on your own feet with Him as your only anchor. This is the beginning of self-reliance, and at the same time, the birth of true tawakkul. You stop depending on what is visible and begin trusting what is unseen. And that shift transforms your entire relationship with life, hardship, and Allah. Self-reliance in Islam is not arrogance or independence from Allah. It is the opposite. It is learning to take responsibility for your choices, your growth, and your healing while placing the outcome fully in Allah's hands. When Allah removes external support, He teaches you how to make decisions without constant reassurance, how to move without applause, and how to keep walking even when no one is watching. The believer discovers a quiet courage in these moments, a strength that does not need validation, only guidance from Allah. This is also where tawakkul matures. Many people think they trust Allah until the safety nets disappear. Real tawakkul is tested when the bank account is uncertain, the people you relied on are gone, and the path ahead is unclear. It is then that the heart must choose panic or prayer, fear or faith. Tawakkul does not mean you stop trying. It means you try with full effort while your heart remains calm because it knows who controls the outcome. Allah trains you in this state by removing what you thought was holding you together, so you finally realize it was Him all along. When Allah teaches self-reliance, He also teaches emotional stability. You stop depending on people for your peace, your confidence, and your sense of worth. You learn to regulate your emotions through remembrance of Allah, through prayer, through reflection, and through patience. This inner balance is a priceless gift. The believer who develops it becomes steady in storms, calm in chaos, and focused even when everything feels uncertain. Support is removed so you can meet yourself. Many people never truly know who they are because their identity is built around relationships, approval, and belonging. When Allah removes these layers, you are left with your true self, your fears, your dreams, your weaknesses, your potential. And in that solitude, Allah begins shaping you directly. Your growth accelerates, your clarity sharpens, your attachment to dunya weakens, your heart becomes more connected to akhirah. This process is uncomfortable. It exposes insecurities, habits, and hidden dependencies. But this discomfort is the soil in which maturity grows. The believer who walks through this stage with patience emerges stronger, wiser, and spiritually deeper. You stop blaming others for your life. You stop waiting for rescue. You stop delaying growth. You become active in your transformation while trusting Allah completely with its results. When self-reliance and tawakkul unite in the heart, the believer becomes unshakable. You do your part with excellence, discipline, and sincerity, then release the outcome to Allah with peace. You are no longer paralyzed by fear of failure because your success is not defined by results, it is defined by obedience. This mindset frees the heart from constant anxiety and fills it with quiet confidence. And one day, when Allah brings new people and new supports into your life, you will not cling to them, you will walk beside them. Because your foundation is no longer built on creation, it is built on the Creator. You will understand why Allah had to remove what He did. Without that season of isolation and reliance, you would never have developed the strength, faith, and clarity your future requires. This is the wisdom of Allah. He removes support to give you something far greater, a heart that stands firmly with Him, no matter who stands with you. Pain is the fuel for growth. Pain is one of the most misunderstood experiences in the life of a believer. We are taught to avoid it, to fear it, to escape it whenever possible. Yet in the divine design of Allah, pain is not an enemy of growth, it is often the very instrument through which growth begins. When life becomes uncomfortable, when the heart aches, when plans collapse and expectations fall apart, Allah is not turning away from you, He is turning you inward. He is clearing the surface so He can begin His work at the root. Many people assume that growth happens when things improve. But the heart rarely changes in comfort. It changes when it is stretched, challenged, and humbled. Pain softens the heart. It dissolves arrogance, weakens false attachments, and removes illusions. The believer who passes through pain with faith does not emerge broken. They emerge awake. Pain forces honesty. It confronts you with what you can no longer ignore: unhealthy habits, misplaced priorities, weak boundaries, and fragile trust. Without pain, these realities often remain hidden. With pain, they become impossible to deny. This is why pain becomes the doorway to growth. It invites you to finally see what Allah has been trying to show you all along. In pain, the believer learns the true meaning of dependence on Allah. When everything else feels unstable, the heart naturally seeks something firm, and only Allah provides that stability. Pain strips away false security and redirects the heart toward its true source of safety. This is where tawakkul deepens. This is where prayer becomes sincere. This is where faith moves from words into lived experience. Pain also refines intention. Many of us move through life driven by routine, expectation, or pressure. But pain interrupts that cycle. It forces reflection. It makes the believer pause and ask, why am I doing what I am doing? Where is my life heading? Who am I becoming? These questions are painful, but they are essential. Without them, growth remains superficial. When the heart is wounded, the soul becomes sensitive. It becomes more aware of what nurtures it and what poisons it. The believer begins to choose differently. They protect their energy, their time, and their faith with greater care. This is not bitterness. It is wisdom born from experience. Pain also builds resilience. Each trial you endure strengthens your ability to carry the next one. Each hardship increases your emotional, spiritual, and psychological capacity. What once overwhelmed you becomes manageable. What once shattered you becomes familiar ground. This resilience does not make life painless, but it makes the believer capable. One of the greatest transformations pain produces is humility. When the heart is humbled, it becomes open to guidance. The believer stops assuming they know best and begins listening for divine direction. This openness invites barakah into the heart and clarity into the mind. Pain removes attachment to the dunya. When comfort fades, the believer realizes how temporary everything truly is. Wealth, people, plans, and status reveal their fragile nature. The heart that once clung tightly now learns to hold lightly. This shift frees the soul and prepares it for lasting contentment. In pain, worship changes. Duha becomes more present. Prayer becomes more intimate. The Quran becomes more alive. The believer no longer recites from habit but from hunger. Hunger for peace, for understanding, for closeness to Allah. Pain teaches patience, but not passive patience. It teaches active patience, the kind that continues striving while trusting Allah. This patience builds maturity and emotional balance. The believer who grows through pain becomes a source of strength for others. Their words carry depth. Their compassion becomes genuine. Their advice is rooted in lived experience, not theory. Pain also clarifies purpose. The believer begins to see that their life is not random. Every hardship fits into a larger story Allah is writing. What once felt meaningless begins to reveal meaning. Growth through pain is not about eliminating suffering. It is about transforming it. Pain becomes the teacher. Growth becomes the lesson. Faith becomes the foundation. Allah does not waste pain. He recycles it into wisdom, strength, clarity, and faith. What the world calls breaking, Allah calls building. The believer who walks through pain with Allah never walks out the same. They walk out stronger, calmer, wiser, and closer to their Lord. And this is the great secret of faith. The pain you thought would destroy you becomes the fuel that carries you into the life Allah prepared for you. Discipline in isolation builds leaders. Isolation is one of Allah's most powerful classrooms. When the noise fades and the crowd disappears, the believer is left alone with their intentions, habits, fears, and purpose. It is in this quiet space that discipline is born, and discipline is the foundation of leadership. Leaders are not shaped in comfort or applause. They are shaped in silence, consistency, and unseen effort. Discipline in isolation begins with responsibility. No one is watching. No one is reminding you. No one is correcting you. Every choice becomes a reflection of your character. This is where true integrity is formed. When a believer remains consistent in obedience, even without witnesses, Allah builds a heart that can be trusted with greater responsibility. Isolation exposes distraction. Without external stimulation, the mind becomes clearer and the heart more honest. The believer begins to see where time has been wasted, where energy has been misused, and where growth has been neglected. This awareness becomes the starting point of discipline. You cannot correct what you refuse to acknowledge. In isolation, discipline must be intentional. You choose when to wake, when to pray, what to consume, what to avoid, and what to pursue. These decisions, repeated daily, become habits, and habits become destiny. This is how Allah constructs leaders from the inside out. Leadership requires emotional stability. Isolation teaches the believer how to manage their thoughts, regulate their emotions, and remain focused despite uncertainty. This emotional mastery is not learned in crowds, it is developed in stillness. Discipline in isolation strengthens self-trust. You begin to rely on your own consistency rather than external motivation. The believer becomes dependable to themselves and, ultimately, to others. Isolation also refines intention. Without the influence of public approval, your actions become purely for Allah. This sincerity attracts divine support in ways no human validation ever could. Discipline in solitude builds courage. You learn to walk without reassurance, to decide without consensus, and to persist without applause. This courage is essential for leadership, because leaders often stand alone before they stand supported. Isolation teaches patience with process. Growth feels slow when no one sees it, but Allah sees every step. This knowledge strengthens perseverance and deepens trust in divine timing. Discipline also restores order. The believer begins structuring their life around prayer, reflection, learning, and service. Chaos is replaced by clarity. Confusion gives way to direction. Leaders emerge from isolation with vision. They understand themselves, their mission, and their responsibility before Allah. This clarity becomes their compass in every decision. Discipline in isolation teaches the believer how to sacrifice comfort for purpose. They choose long-term growth over short-term relief. This ability separates leaders from followers. The believer also learns to face themselves honestly. Their weaknesses, fears, and insecurities come to the surface. Rather than running from them, they confront them with prayer, effort, and patience. Isolation builds inner authority. You no longer depend on others to validate your worth or direction. Your heart is anchored in Allah, and that anchor steadies every step. Discipline in solitude deepens spiritual connection. Dhikr becomes consistent. Quran becomes nourishment. Duha becomes intimate. The believer's inner world becomes rich and alive. This depth is what allows leaders to carry the weight of responsibility without collapsing. Isolation also sharpens focus. The believer learns to eliminate distractions and commit to what truly matters. When Allah finally places such a believer in leadership, their foundation is firm, their character is stable, their vision is clear. They do not rise by accident. They rise by discipline. And they remain grounded because their growth was rooted in obedience, not attention. This is how Allah builds leaders, quietly, patiently, powerfully. Discipline in isolation also teaches the believer how to listen. When voices fall silent, the heart becomes more attentive to guidance. You begin to hear your own thoughts clearly, to recognize which ones are sincere and which ones are rooted in fear. This awareness is essential for leadership, because a leader must first lead their own inner world before they can guide others. Isolation removes comparison. When you are not constantly measuring yourself against others, you begin to understand your own pace, your own capacity, and your own calling. Discipline grows naturally in this space because you are no longer distracted by what others are doing or achieving. You are focused on what Allah is asking of you. Leadership requires consistency, and isolation is where consistency is tested. There are days when motivation disappears completely. In those moments, discipline is the only thing that carries the believer forward. This quiet persistence becomes a defining trait of those Allah prepares for responsibility. Discipline in isolation also builds humility. You realize how dependent you are on Allah for guidance, strength, and clarity. Without external support, you see clearly that progress comes only through His help. This humility protects leaders from arrogance when success later arrives. The believer learns to manage time differently in isolation. Hours are no longer filled automatically. You must decide how to use them. This forces intentional living. Prayer becomes scheduled, learning becomes prioritized, and distractions are deliberately reduced. Isolation reveals the true state of the heart. Without constant interaction, emotions surface honestly. Discipline teaches the believer how to respond rather than react. You learn to sit with discomfort, to process pain through prayer, and to seek Allah rather than escape. Leaders who are shaped in isolation develop emotional depth. They become patient listeners, thoughtful speakers, and compassionate guides. This depth cannot be learned from theory alone. It is born from lived experience with silence and self-discipline. Discipline also strengthens boundaries. In isolation, you become aware of what drains you and what nourishes you. This awareness allows you to protect your energy, your faith, and your focus. Leaders who lack boundaries eventually burn out. Those trained in isolation endure. Isolation teaches the believer to find fulfillment internally rather than externally. You stop needing constant affirmation. Your sense of worth stabilizes. This inner security allows leaders to make difficult decisions without fear of rejection. Discipline in isolation also trains the believer to remain steady under pressure. When challenges arise later, the leader does not panic. They have already learned how to sit with uncertainty and move forward calmly. The believer who develops discipline in solitude becomes adaptable. They can function in silence and in crowds, in ease and in hardship. This flexibility is a hallmark of strong leadership. Isolation also strengthens problem-solving skills. Without immediate help, you learn to think critically, seek knowledge, and make informed decisions. This independence does not replace reliance on Allah, it complements it. Discipline nurtured in isolation sharpens moral clarity. Without social pressure, the believer aligns actions strictly with faith. This integrity becomes visible when leadership positions are eventually entrusted. Leaders shaped by isolation are not driven by ego, they are driven by responsibility. They understand that leadership is service, not status. Discipline also builds resilience against criticism. When you are used to standing alone, opinions lose their power over you. This emotional stability allows leaders to remain focused on their mission. Isolation teaches patience with growth. You stop rushing outcomes and start trusting the process. This patience translates into wise decision-making. When Allah eventually expands the believer's circle, they do not lose themselves. Their discipline keeps them grounded. Leadership built through isolation is quiet, but firm. It does not seek attention. It earns respect through consistency. The believer learns that real influence comes from character, not charisma. Discipline in isolation also strengthens gratitude. You become thankful for small progress, small clarity, small victories. This gratitude fuels perseverance. Leaders who are disciplined in solitude do not fear being alone. They fear being misaligned. They understand that solitude was not absence, it was preparation. When Allah places them among people again, they carry the calm, focus, and strength forged in silence. This is why Allah isolates before He elevates. This is why discipline precedes influence. And this is why leaders shaped by Allah endure long after attention fades. Rise even if you must walk alone. There are moments in a believer's life when the road forward becomes quiet and unfamiliar. The companions you expected to walk with you no longer remain. The voices that once encouraged you have grown distant. And you realize that this journey, the one Allah has placed before you, may require you to walk it alone. This realization is heavy at first, but within it lies the beginning of real strength. because the believer who learns to rise without the comfort of company becomes unbreakable by the absence of it. Walking alone does not mean being abandoned by Allah. It means He has decided to teach you how to rely on Him directly. Some lessons cannot be learned in a crowd. Some strengths are not formed in comfort. They are forged when the heart chooses to keep moving, even when no one else is watching. The believer who walks alone begins to understand their own soul. Without external influence, the heart becomes honest. You discover what truly motivates you, what weakens you, and what nourishes your faith. This self-awareness becomes the foundation of growth. Rising while walking alone requires courage. It is easier to move when supported. It is harder when every step depends on your own resolve and your trust in Allah. Yet this difficulty builds the strongest kind of character, the kind that does not crumble when approval disappears. The believer who rises alone becomes steady. They are no longer driven by applause or recognition. Their effort becomes sincere, their intention becomes pure, and their focus becomes sharp. Walking alone also refines your priorities. You stop wasting energy trying to hold on to people who are no longer meant to walk beside you. You begin investing in what truly matters: your faith, your growth, your purpose. When you walk alone, your relationship with Allah deepens. Dua becomes your constant companion. The Quran becomes your refuge. Prayer becomes your anchor. This solitude is not emptiness, it is space. Space for healing, space for clarity, space for Allah to rebuild you. The believer who rises alone develops resilience. They no longer collapse under pressure. They adapt, adjust, and continue. Walking alone also teaches humility. You recognize how much you need Allah at every step. This dependence strengthens tawakkul and softens the heart. The believer who accepts this path stops fearing isolation. They understand that solitude is temporary, but the strength it produces is lasting. Rising alone builds inner confidence, not the loud kind that seeks attention, but the quiet kind that knows where it stands. This confidence protects you from returning to what once weakened you. You no longer beg for acceptance, you choose alignment. Walking alone trains the heart to stay disciplined. Without accountability from others, you learn to hold yourself accountable before Allah. The believer who rises alone becomes emotionally stable. They are not easily shaken by loss, disappointment, or delay. This stability attracts the right people at the right time, but when they arrive, you no longer depend on them for your sense of worth. Rising alone teaches you that your journey is unique. Comparison fades, envy dissolves, contentment grows. You stop measuring your progress against others and start measuring your obedience to Allah. The believer who rises alone learns patience with the process. They trust that every step, even the slow ones, is building their future. Walking alone also sharpens focus. Distractions fall away. Purpose becomes clear. This clarity makes the believer difficult to derail. The believer who rises alone becomes a source of light for others later, because their strength is not borrowed, it is built. They understand struggle. They understand growth. They understand faith. And when Allah finally sends companions for the journey, they are ready to walk with wisdom, not dependence. Rising alone is not a curse, it is a calling to become who Allah created you to be, without noise, without pressure, without compromise. And the believer who accepts that calling never remains the same. Walking alone also teaches the believer how to manage their thoughts. When there is no one to distract you, the mind becomes louder. Discipline is required to keep it from wandering into despair or self-doubt. This is where remembrance of Allah becomes essential, anchoring the heart and giving direction to the mind. The believer who rises alone learns how to turn pain into purpose. They stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin asking, "What is Allah preparing me for?" This shift transforms hardship into hope and confusion into clarity. Walking alone builds emotional maturity. You stop expecting others to rescue you from discomfort. You stop demanding explanations for every delay. You learn to sit with uncertainty while trusting Allah's wisdom. This path develops inner leadership. You begin making decisions from conviction rather than pressure. You act from values rather than fear of being misunderstood. Rising alone teaches you how to forgive without returning to what harmed you. You release resentment, but you keep your boundaries. This balance strengthens the heart. The believer who walks alone becomes less reactive and more reflective. Instead of rushing to respond, they pause, think, and choose with intention. Walking alone also strengthens intuition, guided by faith. You learn to recognize what feels right because it aligns with Allah's guidance, not because it pleases others. The believer develops a sense of self that is rooted in purpose. They no longer feel lost when plans change or people leave. Their identity is no longer fragile. Rising alone builds gratitude. You begin to appreciate small blessings, quiet progress, and unseen growth. This gratitude protects the heart from bitterness and envy. Walking alone also sharpens discernment. You begin to notice which paths lead to peace and which lead to distraction. The believer becomes careful with their time. They choose activities that nourish their soul rather than drain it. Rising alone builds patience with the self. You learn that growth is not instant. You allow yourself to improve without harsh judgment. Walking alone teaches you how to celebrate progress without needing applause. The believer learns that consistency matters more than speed. Rising alone also strengthens your relationship with struggle. You stop fearing it. You start respecting what it teaches you. The believer becomes resilient. They do not crumble when faced with new challenges, they adapt. Walking alone builds self-respect. You no longer chase what once diminished you. The believer learns to walk away from situations that weaken their iman. Rising alone teaches you how to listen to your heart while following your faith. The believer becomes more confident in silence than in noise. Walking alone builds endurance. You continue even when tired. The believer stops seeking permission to grow. Rising alone deepens spiritual awareness. You feel Allah's presence in every step. The believer understands that loneliness is not absence of love, it is the presence of preparation. Walking alone removes fear of the unknown. You begin trusting the path Allah is revealing. The believer becomes courageous in the face of uncertainty. Rising alone makes you emotionally independent but spiritually dependent. Walking alone develops humility. You recognize your weakness and rely on Allah's strength. The believer begins to see their life as a mission rather than a moment. Rising alone prepares you for leadership, responsibility, and service. Walking alone removes attachment to validation. The believer finds peace in knowing that Allah is sufficient. Rising alone teaches you that the road may be lonely, but the destination is worth it. And when you finally look back, you will understand that walking alone was never a punishment. It was Allah's way of building the strongest version of you. When Allah is all you have, you become unstoppable. There comes a moment in the believer's journey when every familiar support disappears. The people who once stood close are no longer there. The plans that once seemed secure begin to crumble. The future feels uncertain, and the heart stands in a place it has never stood before alone, exposed and vulnerable. And it is in this exact moment, when Allah becomes all you have, that you discover a strength you never knew existed, because the heart that leans fully on Allah cannot be broken by the loss of anything else. When Allah is all you have, your fear begins to dissolve. You stop asking who will help you and start trusting the one who controls all help. You stop waiting for reassurance from creation and begin receiving tranquility directly from the Creator. This shift changes how you face life, how you handle hardship, and how you respond to uncertainty. The believer who reaches this stage becomes spiritually grounded. Their heart no longer swings with circumstances. Success does not inflate them. Failure does not destroy them. They move through life with a steady calm because their foundation is no longer built on what changes, it is built on Allah, who never changes. When Allah is all you have, you become independent of the world, but deeply connected to the heavens. You no longer need constant validation. You no longer chase approval. You are no longer controlled by fear of loss. Your contentment becomes internal, rooted in trust and surrender. This is where true strength is born, not the strength of control, but the strength of acceptance. Not the strength of resistance, but the strength of reliance. The believer who trusts Allah completely gains a peace that makes them resilient in the face of any trial. When Allah is all you have, your priorities realign. You begin choosing what is right over what is easy. You protect your faith with courage. You guard your heart with wisdom. You move with intention rather than impulse. This reliance produces clarity. You stop wasting energy on what cannot save you. You stop clinging to what cannot last. You begin investing in what truly matters: your relationship with Allah, your character, your purpose, and your akhirah. The believer who reaches this state becomes unshakable. They are not easily discouraged. They are not easily distracted. They are not easily defeated. Their strength does not come from circumstance. It comes from conviction. When Allah is all you have, your dua becomes sincere, your prayers become intimate, and your heart becomes alive with remembrance. Worship is no longer routine, it becomes refuge. You begin to feel Allah's presence in every step. You sense His protection in every decision. You recognize His wisdom in every delay. The believer who relies on Allah this way walks through life with quiet confidence. They do not rush the future, they trust it. They do not panic when doors close. They know Allah opens better ones. They do not collapse when people leave. They know Allah remains. When Allah is all you have, your inner world becomes rich. Your mind becomes peaceful. Your soul becomes steady. The believer no longer fears loneliness. They fear losing closeness to Allah. This is the point where hardship no longer defines you. It refines you. When Allah is all you have, nothing in this world can stop you. Because your strength is not limited by what is seen. It is sustained by the one who is unseen. You walk forward even when the path is unclear. You rise even when the weight is heavy. You continue even when the night is long. This is not stubbornness. This is faith. The believer who stands on Allah stands on an unbreakable foundation. And that is why, when Allah becomes all you have, you become unstoppable. When Allah is all you have, your heart learns how to carry the weight of life without collapsing beneath it. You are no longer fragile in the face of disappointment, because your hope is anchored somewhere unshakable. What once broke you now bends you without destroying you. This resilience is not learned from books, it is born from reliance on Allah. The believer who reaches this stage stops bargaining with hardship. They no longer ask when the test will end, they ask how they can grow through it. This shift changes suffering into strength and waiting into worship. When Allah is all you have, your relationship with time changes. You stop rushing what is written, you stop fearing what is unseen. You walk with patience because you trust the one who holds tomorrow. The believer becomes steady even when surrounded by uncertainty. Their peace no longer depends on outcomes, it flows from surrender. When Allah is all you have, you stop trying to control what cannot be controlled. You release the illusion of power and accept the gift of trust. This acceptance brings relief to the heart. The believer also becomes fearless in obedience. You choose truth even when it costs you. You choose discipline even when it isolates you. You choose faith even when it makes your path lonely. This courage builds a soul that is difficult to break. When Allah is all you have, your heart becomes less reactive and more reflective. You respond with wisdom instead of emotion. You act with intention instead of impulse. The believer begins to see every challenge as an opportunity to strengthen their relationship with Allah. When Allah is all you have, you no longer chase what drains you. You walk away from what weakens your iman. You protect your peace with firm boundaries. Your choices become deliberate. Your priorities become clear. The believer becomes deeply content even in simplicity. They no longer measure their life by what is missing, but by what is meaningful. When Allah is all you have, gratitude replaces complaint. Trust replaces fear. Calm replaces chaos. The believer no longer feels small in the face of the world. They feel supported by the heavens. When Allah is all you have, your heart becomes spacious. There is room for patience, for mercy, for growth. You forgive more easily because your heart is no longer starved. You endure more quietly because your strength comes from Allah. When Allah is all you have, your identity becomes stable. You are no longer defined by people's opinions or life's fluctuations. You know who you are, a servant of Allah, held, guided, protected. This certainty gives you unshakable confidence. The believer becomes capable of walking long roads without losing direction. When Allah is all you have, you do not fear being alone, you fear being distant from Him. Your solitude becomes sanctuary, your silence becomes healing, your tears become prayer, your patience becomes power. When Allah is all you have, the world no longer intimidates you. Loss no longer cripples you. Delay no longer discourages you, because your heart knows where it belongs. The believer becomes unstoppable not because life becomes easy, but because their soul becomes strong. This is the strength Allah gives when you finally let Him be enough. And nothing in this world can overpower a heart that stands with Allah. When you feel like you have no one, remember you have Allah, and that is more than enough. The world may not see your struggle, but Allah sees every tear, every silent prayer, every step you take in the dark. He is shaping you in the shadows before He brings you into the light. Do not curse this season. This is the season of becoming. Rise even when your heart feels tired. Rise even when your path feels lonely. Rise because Allah is with you, and when Allah is with you, no force in this world can stop what is written for you.